Vamos Ventures.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Sergio, depending on who I'm speaking with, the answer is different. And I don't mean that in a kind of duplicitous way. I mean that technically, Bombos Ventures represents something. And then there's the spirit of it. So the technical answer is Bombos Ventures is a early stage venture capital fund. Our target size is $25 million. We've been raising capital. We're at about 18.5 million right now. I think we're going to end up with probably close to our target in the next several months, but we'll be using that money to invest in early stage tech companies that are led by diverse teams. So to unpack that a little bit, it'll be anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 as an initial investment. And if there's certain metrics hit to do a follow-on investment, then we'll invest another 500,000 to a million as a follow-on investment. It's obviously not guaranteed, but we'd love to do it if the company's doing well. In terms of industries, we're pretty agnostic with industries, although there's some that we kind of stay away from. For example, we don't know anything about cryptocurrency, so we're probably not going to invest in cryptocurrency. There's other things like biotech or hardware that we really don't know enough about, or we just don't believe the risk profile is really great for us, so we stay away from that. But generally speaking, we're pretty agnostic. So what we really look for is for companies that are generating some traction. They're still early stage. And when I say traction, I mean some revenues. So even if it's $5,000 a month, that's something we want to be able to see that. So from there and above, what we're also looking for are teams that are diverse, as I said. And what that means to us is teams that have at least one meaningful co-founder from an underrepresented group. So it could be veteran, disabled, LGBTQ, Hispanic, African American, women, etc. Whole team doesn't have to be diverse, meaning of color or some group, but there has to be at least some presence on the team. So that's the technical answer of what is Vamos Ventures. It's this $25 million fund, early stage, these check sizes, cross industries, these teams.
Thank you for sharing a little bit about the fund and can you also tell me a little bit about you? How did you come to start Vamos Ventures?
So I've had an interesting career that has touched on several things that I think are important when it comes to venture. And I've also hit a point in just life where you think about what was it all for? And I'm not 80 years old, but you get to a point where you start thinking, what's it all about? Why have I done all this, et cetera? And that came to me a few years ago. And I had had a career in strategy consulting. I had worked in private equity, so I worked at several funds, doing deals and private deals and so on. I've been a tech entrepreneur in the first internet days in late 99, 2000 in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm Latino. And so I've had these experiences, and just being Latino or Latina is not enough, I don't think, but I'd been engaged, in my mind, an engaged Latino in this country. So whether I lived in Washington, D.C. or Boston or, Los Angeles or somewhere else, always been involved in some way as a volunteer, contributor, engaged culturally, politically, business-wise. All these things, I think, rose to the top as the main drivers of what was next in life. And so I spent some time just thinking about how do I combine these items in a meaningful way to me, personally meaningful and intellectually meaningful, that could be, fulfilling. And so the idea of a Vamos Venture started to percolate around, and it was a time in my career also where I had some time to think. And so that's, all these things, all these kind of pieces of the puzzle started coming together. And what the picture that started to kind of crystallize was a fund for diverse and in particular Hispanic entrepreneurs. That's kind of what led to it, is these different parts of experience, I'd say.
Into you, what gave you the sense that there was a need? Like, what was if there was a moment or a story from your experience that you said there's a need here, and I want to feel, I want to fill that.
Yeah, that's a good question. As we talk here, I'm going to give some answers, and on the surface it may be pretty basic, whatever. There's so much underneath. I'm sure all your guests, including yourself, have a lot underneath these things. For me, it was a couple things. One is that in the private equity world, you invest in companies that are already established, generally speaking, and the way you generate value or wealth is by many times financial engineering, moving jobs overseas, reducing jobs, producing more widgets faster at a lower cost. And there's not a lot of, great contribution to humanity through that. But there is more of that in venture. So in the venture world, you do see people trying to solve big problems and address challenges in unique, innovative ways that technology allows you to do. And it's I'm simplifying this. Obviously, there are things in private equity, larger businesses that you can do, but you don't see it as much as you do in the early stage tech world. So the need for me was spending some time in the Bay Area, pretty much on a hunch, spending time in the Bay Area and just having something hit me over the head, which was, holy smokes. There's so much wealth being created in the Bay Area, and I don't see a lot of people like us here, number one. And number two, the future is being invented here, the way we live our lives, personally, professionally, and we're not part of that either. So to me, the need came from, the realization beyond the headlines, but actually internal, being there, that this was the center of the universe in many ways, and we were not part of that. And that led to the question, why not? And part of the answer was there are no easy ways to raise money, number one. And it's especially hard if you don't have networks that you can go to for guidance, advice, people checkbooks, etc. So as long as that's the case, we are going to remain on the outside. And so the need of a fund like this and others like this one became pretty clear to me after spending time, in the Bay Area and thinking about it and talking to people.
So great. Right now, also, you're locating the business in LA, correct? And can you talk a little bit about your thoughts behind why you located the venture fund there versus other ecosystems?
Sure. Well, number one, I think that there's such a thing as groupthink, and I was part of that back in the first internet days. So I think being in the Bay Area, my take is that you're susceptible to that. This week, the latest fad is X, and everybody's going to follow it. Next week, it's Y, and you're going to do that. And so you might do things you really don't want to do. So I wanted to stay away from it. And number two, the nature of our fund. By the way, I'm from Los Angeles, so I'm born and raised in the city of LA. And although I lived most of my adult life outside of Los Angeles on the East Coast in Latin America, I am still, a son of the city. And so not only do I believe there's value of not being in Silicon Valley, but the nature of this fund is to really focus on diverse founders, but the spirit is focusing on Latinx founders. And Los Angeles is a Latino city. And it really bothers me that Los Angeles, despite being a Latino city, has ceded leadership in various areas when it comes to the Latino, leadership, initiatives, breakthroughs, things like this to other cities in this country. It kind of bugs me in a competitive way. And so I thought, we need to do it. We should be able to do it in Los Angeles. This should be a leader. There should be space in the city of LA, being a Latino city, to really support funds like this and entrepreneurs who are Latinx entrepreneurs. So that's the second reason why we're in Los Angeles.
No, that's great. And how are you thinking about connecting to other cities of diverse populations, especially the Latino population? I think about San Antonio. Do you look at Puerto Rico? It's Commonwealth, but still, can you share more about how you think about sourcing for
Sure.
Latinx talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I just said Los Angeles, right? We need to be in LA, and we are in LA. But despite that, if we're going to look for the best and brightest Latinx founders, we cannot limit ourselves to LA or California. So we are very much spending time and creating new and reactivating existing relationships in key cities on a proactive basis. Looking at New York, Boston, DC, Chicago, Portland, San Francisco, of course. Those are the key cities where we are proactively engaging with folks, talking to entrepreneurs, developing relationships with incubators, accelerators, and other business and leaders in the community. On a reactive, opportunistic basis, I don't care where they are. Somebody shows up in Omaha, Nebraska, and they're a great team and doing something really interesting. They're a diverse team and they include Latinx folks. Great. Would love to do it. Would love to see it. And if it makes sense, back them. So if for the founders out there, you know the cities that we kind of are spending time in intentionally, but you should know that if you're not in any of those cities, it doesn't matter. If you reach out to us, we'll make the time. In Puerto Rico, by the way, we've invested in 6 companies so far. I think 2 or 3 are led by Puerto Rican entrepreneurs. A lot of our investors are Puerto Rican. So I have a big spot in my heart for Puerto Rico, and we haven't done a deal on the island yet, but we know people there. We know folks that are very active on the island, trying to push the ecosystem. So I think that there'll be something for us there soon.
That's great. Can you share more also about, I know right now we're in a time where the topic of systemic racism and highlighting not only the Black founders and but also people of color at large is, I would say, now in fashion when it hasn't always been. And I know you've been kind of holding this flag for a while. Can you share more of the story of what did it take to get here? Like, can you share more of some of the challenges for those that are looking to start their own funds and are passionate about certain areas of interest?
Yeah, sure. If it's, kind of being an entrepreneur in any business is hard, right? And you could be starting a brick and mortar business or a tech business or a fund. You need to be an entrepreneur to do that. And it takes a lot. It's a intellectual challenge. It's a psychological challenge. It's an emotional challenge. It's a physical stamina challenge. All of those things, and you need to be ready for that regardless. I think to get into the investment world as an investor, as I always ask folks that tell me that they want to be in a VC, I always ask them if they want to be an investor or a fund manager. And sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't get it exactly. But I always say, look, if you want to be an investor, you can be an investor today. And you can take out your checkbook and you can write $1,000 check or $5,000 or whatever it is and do a deal. If you want to be a fund manager, that's a different business. And then that really means taking on a lot of responsibility and running a business. It's not your money anymore. And now you really are a fiduciary. You're responsible. You have a legal responsibility to manage capital and manage decisions in a way that's appropriate. And many times come under legal compliance requirements. So you really have to be conscious of these things and know what you're getting into. And it's not as sexy as everybody thinks it is. Writing a check is one of the few, it takes a little bit of time to do that. There's a lot of other work before and a lot of other work after that people don't talk about and not as glamorous. So I think spending time and getting to know what that world really is all about is something you should do. Anyone should do. But then getting into it is very, very, very difficult. It's, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, private equity, diverse folks in private equity was very hard to do. 30 years ago, investment banking was really hard to get into. But you see so many more people of color in investment banking today. And in private equity, you see a lot more folks of color now in private equity. But venture still remains one of those areas that because it's so small, decision-making is really done behind closed doors. And I don't mean that in a kind of malicious way or, it's more of a just practical reality. There's 2 guys sitting in an office who are running a fund, and all of a sudden they need to hire an associate. And what do? Well, they're not going to be a Bank of America and post it in 5 different job sites and have their HR person ensure that they, interview 20 people and et cetera, et cetera. There's 2 guys that look at each other and they say, hey, isn't your little nephew graduating from college this year? Why don't we hire him? And that's how you make hiring decisions. It's obviously simplified, of course, but generally speaking, that industries kind of work this way. So in these cottage industries, because of that, it's really hard to show up and be part of it. Um, Look at us, VamosVentures. This summer, we have 4 summer associates. It's a lot of work, but we got 4 summers because we're trying to open the pipeline of folks that just have exposure to venture capital and know what it's like to be inside of a fund. So 2 guys, 2 gals. Last year, we had 4 as well. 2 guys, 2 gals, 2 biracial, 2 Hispanic. Um, you know, if somebody, you know, if you ask me, I will always bring on somebody of color first because it's, very difficult to get those kinds of opportunities somewhere else. Now, when they graduate from college or business school and they compete for a job in venture capital, they're going to be competing with the 10 guys who work for their dad's firm or their uncle's firm. This kind of parody. I'm parodying this whole thing, but, work for their whatever's firm and know exactly what venture is all about because they've heard their mom and dad talk about it growing up. And it's a kind of a difficult fight. So that's part of the reason why it's so hard to get into VC. It's a small circle, and if you don't have any kind of exposure to it, so on, it's almost impossible to break in. So what do? You create the Negro Leagues, and you create your own game, and eventually people will see, hey, they can play, and ideally over time, you got a Jackie Robinson, and you got someone else, you got a Roberto Clemente, and you say, hey, we should be integrated. So over time, hopefully that's what will happen. But right now, we kind of have to do our own thing.
And how can you talk about in communicating this to LPs that this is not Miriam from Ulu Ventures, when we were talking about diversity, she's like, this is not about doing something nice that makes money. Can you share a little bit more about your thesis around investing in diversity, and is it and how you communicate the value of that to LPs?
When you're starting a fund, the LPs that are going to join you are going to do it for more than making money. And generally speaking, if you're a diverse manager who has not worked at Sequoia or Kleiner and so on, and they're going to support you for a variety of reasons. Obviously, one of them is not to lose money, and they want to make some money. But generally, they know you or have gotten to know you, and they believe in the mission, the vision, and so on top of potential returns, right? So every LP will be looking for alpha. Every LP wants to diversify their management portfolio and so on. But if you're starting a fund, you got to have something more, and or else it's a losing battle, right? There's plenty of other funds that have been around now for 2-3 funds that have done well. So why would they ever invest in you, right? Tables were turned, same thing. So you really have to know who you're talking to, be very clear about your mission and what you're going to deliver. Even if it is social impact first, return second, that's okay. As long as you're clear on it and you're communicating it, you will find, if you can figure it out, you will find LPs to back that mission, that strategy, right? You just have to be clear. For us, it's not about, just, doing good and feeling good and, that kind of thing. I always said, we're investors first. When we look at a deal, it's a creative process, and we want to do a deal, and we want to be able to be successful and generate wealth, right? We just happen to believe that there's a lot of great assets, so to speak, in diverse communities that are completely overlooked. So I always, I don't always say, but sometimes I would tell LPs or I tell other people, if you knew nothing about currencies and somebody else was an expert in currencies, who's going to make the money there? The guy or the gal that knows about currencies probably knows something about that market that they're going to be able to make money before you do. In fact, you might even lose your shirt and they're going to make money. A real estate, market. A real estate investor knows something about real estate that you probably don't. Commodities trader knows something about commodities that you probably don't. Diverse assets. We should know something about these diverse founders and communities that the general, average, person out there doesn't know, right? So we need to leverage that. That's something that we can leverage right now on top of just management experience, investment experience, entrepreneurial experience, all those other things. But we're just like a commodity trader in that sense, in that we know something about a market where we can see, people will say arbitrage, right? I don't like the word arbitrage, but I like the idea of saying, look, For most other investors, they look at this asset, this individual, this team, and they're penalizing it. They're handicapping it in a certain way. But we know something. We can see something, just like a commodity trader can, or a real estate investor can, a currency, and we're able to handicap that asset a little bit better. And that's an advantage. And that's where we can see it. On top of that, how great is it that we're Hispanic? And that's one of our areas of focus. Young demographic, high growth, super entrepreneurial, super creative. If you're going to put $1 down on a kind of large kind of aggregate basis, that's where you want to put your dollar down. So, all of these things have come together for us. And that's how I communicate it to LPs, depending on the LP, but that's more or less how I communicate it. First, we can deliver wealth, but we're also going to deliver impact. And here's what impact means, X, Y, and Z.
Can you share more also about how you uniquely add value to your portfolio companies and what you do for them?
Thank you for allowing me to have coffee during this interview.
Of course. No, in the time of COVID, we got everybody's home and we're penetrating. We're not in. We have our home studios, which is work, which is also living. So we have to make do. So thank you for letting us in, Marcos.
No, of course. So every investor will tell founding teams, generally speaking, we add value, and I think, generally speaking, most investors want to add value. The way we try to do it is the following way, and that's that, the networks that we've been exposed to and through our work at BCG or, through, business schools, you mentioned HBS, working in private equity for many years, developing relationships with folks that are now our peers, but are now senior people at large companies and interesting companies that could be great business development partners for companies that we invest in. That is the number one source, well, maybe not number one, but it's a very top level source of value add that we want to be able to offer. So one of the things that we look at when we look at an opportunity is if we can't think of 3 potential customers that we can bring to the table, even if it's a pilot customer for this company, then why are we looking at this business? So that's one, business development opportunities. 2, strategy and guidance. So learned a lot doing our own tech companies, and obviously at BCG learned a lot in terms of strategy. So when we talk to founders, a lot of times it's sitting in a room trying to get to the right questions, trying to think about the problems they're trying to solve in a structured, logical way, and trying to figure out some insights that they may be missing or that we may be able to add that could help the business, even if it's a bit of a nuanced change, but that could facilitate a breakthrough. So that's what would be the second one. And of course, the money doesn't hurt either. So we try to bring money and other people that might have capital as investors to the deal.
You've also shared that you do things for founders that you don't end up financially investing in. How are you backing those founders without capital?
Sure. So Sergio, as you know, just for the folks that are listening, VamosVentures has been a process, work in process now for several years. We made several investments. By the way, this is guidance and advice to anyone out there who's thinking of starting their own fund. We decided to make several investments first, angel investments out of our own pocket, very little money, not a lot of money, in 6 companies. And the reason is when we talk to LPs, even if we can articulate, the whole thing that I was articulating earlier, a lot of folks still don't understand what this means, or they imagine you want to invest in Hispanic entrepreneurs. What does that even look like? So we pretty much decided we need to do some deals. So we made 6 small angel deals to show them as, hey, here's what we're talking about. All right. So because they were done early on, they were small money, and then we had to go to fundraising. We try to be as supportive as possible to those investments. But now that we've raised capital and we're starting to look at deals, now we really want to be able to support these companies in a meaningful way, not only with much bigger checks, but also kind of with an infrastructure that can do that. But part of the challenge is that kind of hit us over the head was, well, wait a minute, now that we're starting to look at deals, most of them we're passing on. And when we pass on them, we don't just pass on them. By the way, I think this is a very important thing. I've always kind of said, And I'm smiling because I've said that now several times. I always say, but I've always said that without diverse investors, we're going to have a really hard time. It takes more than diverse founders. We need diverse investors. And here's one example. Every time we pass on a deal, and there's a Latino or Latina that's part of it, I don't just see an entrepreneur. I see myself. I see my brother. I see my little sister. I see my mom. I see my cousin. And how do I say no to them and then just turn away? Hard to do that for a lot of reasons. And I think that that's part of the value that we should be able to bring to the table. And so we sat around and thought, well, we can't say yes and write checks just because we want to. What do we do? So what we've said is we're going to do several things. One, we're going to recognize everybody that comes to us. We see you. We know it's not easy. We've done it too. I've started a company too. I know it's hard, and we see you. Number two, we're going to give you real feedback, constructive feedback. If you don't want it, you don't believe it, that's okay, but it's going to be honest, real feedback. Number three, we're going to try to make connections whenever we can. And number four, you're going to have an open door. Come back. We'll take another look. Come back in 6 months, whatever. We want to talk some more. That's fine. We'll do it. But we want to be able to give at least those four things. And we're working on a fifth now, which is just resources for founders. So we see a deck, for example, and it's not very good. We want to be able to say, hey, take a look at these 3 videos or these 2 videos or this one sample deck, and try to redo this and come back to us if you want to. Or, hey, that pitch, not very good. Here's why. Check out this video, et cetera. Read this article, about what value proposition means. Read this article about what strategic analysis means. So these kinds of things, not just saying, sorry, it's not for us. So we're putting that together now, and we want to be able to offer that too.
Well, that's great. I think it really speaks to think about how you can add to the ecosystem. It's not just about selecting deals. It's about building relationships so those founders come back to you better and ready for investment. So it creates a story and an arc. Okay.
Sergio, and that's probably true, but what drives it more than that is that I wish somebody would have done that for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what drives it more than the bigger idea that you just put out, which I agree with. But I think it's driven more by, we haven't had guidance. We haven't had too much guidance. We've been kind of left to kind of figure things out on our own. And that's really been has really hindered the community. So if we can help anyone kind of in a way that we wish somebody would have helped us, I want to be able to do that or try to do that.
That's awesome. Can you, I want to shift gears slightly to the time we're in now. We're, in a time of COVID and also the social unrest and highlight around what's going on, the injustice in the Black community, or in community at large, but facing the Black community in general. How have you seen this impact some of the companies that you have backed? And if you can share also, we understand it's a tough time, market shrinking, but what have you seen on the positive side? What have you seen that has surprised you from your portfolio companies?
Well, I might ask you to rephrase part of that question.
Yep.
I will say first off that yes, COVID has completely disrupted a lot of things. And to be honest, I'd say that for me and for the fund, it's been minor compared to what it's done to families and individuals all over the world, right? We all know the stories and we've all read the news, and it's horrible. So what's happening to the fund and kind of putting a pause on fundraising and then moving forward, generally on track, I think we're getting off easy. And so that's good. That if there's a challenge to any of this, it's a first world challenge. And that first world challenge is that we have to make do with talking to folks by, video. And initially, I really didn't want to do this. And talking to founders and considering an investment in a company that I've never met before, no. But guess what? We've been talking to a company that we really like. And we're going to see if we can get there. I don't know if we're going to meet in person. But I think this kind of represents this adjustment. Number one. Two, as a team, um, you know, we've learned how to work together. Three, we need to make more of an effort of looking for companies and ideas and trends that are influenced or modified or have originated as a result of what's going on. And we have talked to some companies that are related to remote working or remote learning. So we are seeing that, and we need to spend more time kind of looking at these opportunities. So that's on the COVID front, I'd say. On the social unrest, or maybe you can rephrase your question related to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, it's like what more can we do to elevate Black and Latino founders at large, given that just highlighting these injustices. What can we do specifically? I want to talk specifically as it relates to venture.
Okay, I think that if in the venture, since we're going to just talk about venture, in the venture world, I think that every single venture capital fund out there should commit to bringing on summer interns at the very least, or summer associates, but summer interns in particular, through the summer, into the school year, et cetera, and giving folks of color exposure and the opportunity to build relationships and understand the world of venture. So that's from an investor perspective, and those relationships are super important. So that's one thing, and that's a low commitment, low risk, action that a VC can take. Second is that asset owners, meaning LPs, pensions, company pensions, foundations, and others, should be looking at how do we take more capital and put it behind diverse managers? And if there's a challenge around it, because there's plenty of folks out there trying to do stuff as managers, come up with innovative ways to incubate managers. So if you have a challenge around a manager, and I've heard this before too, and your challenge is around the lack of infrastructure, well, why not help them, provide that infrastructure? Or if the challenge is around economics and the inability to hire, an analyst or an accounting firm, why not hire an accounting firm to do this for 4 or 5 different diverse managers? Look for innovative ways to kind of back these diverse managers. I think that would be one from an asset owner perspective. So that helps managers. Giving them capital, obviously, is super important. I've had conversations with folks that'll say, what can we do? And they're $1 billion, entity, pension. And I'll say, take $10 million and put 1 million behind a diverse, 10 different diverse managers. And sometimes the response is, what's 1 million going to do? Well, it's actually very catalytic, right? When you're raising capital, if you can say pension or foundation X or Y has already committed to the fund, that's a big deal.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of things that can be done that's very low cost, from an asset owner perspective, helping managers, from VCs helping younger folks get exposure as investors who are our future managers. So that's great too. And from a founder perspective, I think that generally speaking, being a founder right now is, it's a great time to be a founder versus 5 years ago, versus 10 years ago for sure. When we started our tech company in 99, 2000, we raised 10 million bucks. We spent half of that on equipment. Today, you would never do that. So you don't need a lot of money to get started. But the challenge for founders of color is the access. But right now, this is a really interesting moment. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today about it is a window. I don't know how long this window is going to last, but if you have a business that you've started or you're getting ready to start, I think now is a good time to get out there and get known and so on. And the last thing I'll say is that there are a lot of companies and organizations that have said we are with founders, Black founders, founders of color, et cetera. But I think there needs to be some money that gets put behind the comments, and especially for larger companies. I'm sure some of them are doing it, but I think that consistently we need to see that. And I've heard from friends that are out there trying to raise money for programs for Black and brown founders that it's still very difficult to do. Every dollar is questioned, et cetera. So, unfortunately, that's that area, that's that world I'm not sure about.
But thank you for sharing that, and I think also the lens you gave, even for pension funds, right? Like they might not think it's very impactful, but it is. It's very catalytic. I like that the word you used. Can you share a little bit more about what is next for VamosVentures?
Sure, sure. And just because this is going to be on video, I want to say that there are pension funds and then there are pension funds, and they all have their different sets of challenges and opportunities. And we have a pension fund that's an LP in our fund, and they're great. And I've known them for a good while, and they're doing amazing work in the market. And then there were others that I thought would be leaders, and they're not, because they have their own challenges. They're not bad people. They just right now they're doing other things. Everybody has to make their but I don't want to focus on pensions. And I know you just kind of threw it out there. It wasn't so much a pension comment, but I will say that I think the future of enabling capital behind diverse managers and diverse founders is not the pensions. It really is going to be foundation and endowment money. And more than that, I think foundations one and endowment second. There's just so much now, so much alignment between mission now and the realization that capital is so tied to what actually happens in the market, right? And access to capital and the management of capital, that now it's getting really difficult to turn a blind eye to that, or to deny it and not link these two. And that's not just what you do with grants, but what you do with your endowment. So I think that's going to be the path. And that kind of leads to VamosVentures' future. In the future of VamosVentures, we will see. But no one starts a fund to do one fund. I see a fund 5 in my future, a 5-10 in my future. And I probably won't be running it. And it'll be young guys and gals who come up the ranks that'll be running it. So ideally, we will be growing in size, but the reason we are very focused on we're a small fund, there's several reasons, but one of them is if you want to back diverse founders, you're going to find them at the seed stage, angel stage, maybe Series A stage. So, but in the future, we're going to see more folks kind of getting through the ranks, and we're going to see B deals and C deals and so on, and that's great. And we hope to grow with them. But I would always want to the goal is to always have a small fund that will be a place that is focused on emerging entrepreneurs and emerging investors, and a farm team, so to speak, of folks that are, cutting their teeth on doing deals and thinking about fund management and fund operations, and also supporting entrepreneurs that are starting their first company or second company and getting that going. That's important. If we just grow, leave that space, and we need to have support there too. So the future, multiple funds will grow in size, but always have the goal is to always have a small kind of entity that will be focusing on the small early stage.
Well, thank you, Marcos, for that. We'll end there. So for everyone watching, this was Rebel One Live, and this is Marcos, the managing partner of VamosVentures. Thank you for joining us and sharing your story today.
Thank you, Sergio. My pleasure. Take care.